European Union. So I would like to make a remark to begin with. It is that it is certainly economics, but it is also something else, which is the European Union. And the European Union is a political organization. So why mix economics and politics? Because it has always been like that. And even the science of economics began by the name of political economy. So 3 centuries ago, more than that, 4 centuries ago as it is today, political economy, and politics are twinned together, are tied together. So I don't want to take too much time with the history of all the treaties. It takes a lot of time, names, numbers, schedules of time for the different treaties. What I would like to focus on is the philosophy of the European Union and the philosophy of the economic union inside Europe today. Of course, the situation today is so different of what it used to be, say, in 1946 or 47, just after the Second World War, that it is impossible to compare Europe today and Europe 50 years ago. It's even difficult to compare Europe today and Europe 20 years ago. Many of you come from different countries that were on the other side of the Iron Curtain. That has been changed. The Soviet army used to be in Berlin, Poland, even in Czechoslovakia, and Hungary, and many other countries. Today it's over. Yeah. The Russian troops, of course, there are problems inside with the Chechnya and other parts, but for today, they are not coming back to Berlin. Now, let's see the situation just after the Second World War. The war has been, the casualty during the Second World War has been extremely high, and people wanted not only to have peace, but there was another danger coming. It was the danger by Stalin and the Soviet Union. So if we don't have that in mind, that the Soviet Union was taking one country after another, and those of you who come from Poland or Hungary or other countries, you know that better than anybody else. So even in France or in Italy, there was a doubt. Are the communists going to do in Paris what they did in Prague? That was a real question. When the communists had 35% of the vote in Italy, same question over there. On top of that, there were revolutionary strikes in the streets. And what happened was a reaction. A reaction of whom against whom? The first reaction was a kind of political reaction that, say, Italy and France, and then later in Germany, but especially Italy and France, people began to think that since there was a present danger, the first thing to do would be to vote against the Communist Party. In France, it had 28 or 30%. In Italy, it was even worse. So there was a kind of coalitions of people, from social democrats or even socialists of the democratic wing, to the Christian Democrats and centrists and the classical liberals. They came together and said, we have a first enemy, we have our differences, of course, but we'll see that later. And for now, we have to fight the first enemy. So that is understandable that the French socialists, like Guy Mollet, or the Italian socialists, like Saragat, and later in Germany, we had that, and we still have that today. Well, the socialists said, since we have to make an alliance to defend ourselves, to keep freedom, then we have to make concession to people who disagree with us. Who disagreed with the socialists? The Christian Democratic Party disagreed on many things. In economics, I spoke about that. They disagree, but the Christian Democrats, who were the majority party to oppose the communists, they were not socialists in the sense that they did not want to nationalize everything. However, in France, the French Christian Democrats voted a tremendous amount of nationalization. But very quickly, it was the first party to say, hey, we have to stop somewhere. So the situation was an economic disaster in Europe. I remember that, I was a kid. There was no cars in the streets. There was nothing in the stores. It was impossible to buy bread. It was impossible to buy milk. It was impossible to buy the necessary things of life. So, in France, for instance, the socialists began to create even more inflation than during the war. Monetary inflation and then price inflation. And then it was even more difficult 5 years after the war, 8 years after the war in France, 52. It was impossible to find something in the stores. What happened? It was even worse than during the war. What happened? During peacetime, the French government created again and again a lot of money, and prices came from 1% to 1,000%. The increase in prices was tremendous. Prices were multiplied by 10. So the socialists decided to have price control. And then with price control and rent control, it was impossible to have even a house or an apartment to live in. So the situation became extreme, I would say even worse after the war than when it was the war. In Germany it was different. In 48, if I remember well, or 49, the German government decided the other way around. It decided to go to free trade. It decided to go to free prices, to free the prices immediately of everything. My understanding is that it was done against the advice of the American embassy at the time. Behind that reform there was certainly Mr. Röpke. There was also Mr. Erhard, who decided to do that. Mr. Konrad Adenauer, who was in charge of Germany after the war. He followed that policy for many years. So let me focus now, since we have this big overlook. Europe was divided. Since the Soviet Union was taking country after country, a word appeared, the Iron Curtain, which was coming from the Soviet Union and the foreign troops. So the free Europe, Germany was cut in two. The free Europe was Western Germany, of course England, there was France and Italy, of course, Spain was under Franco. The free Europe was really small. So the first countries to think to their defense and to think together were the three countries that I just cited, plus, of course, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Holland. There were six. England did not join in the beginning. Churchill said, there should be a union in Europe, but we, the British, will get out that. It's good for Europe, but not for us. Maybe today in Britain, many people still think that way, especially with the euro. If there would be today a referendum on the euro, it would be defeated by tremendous majority. This is why Mr. Blair did not ask for a referendum on the euro, because he knows he's going to lose it. Now, if he thinks at one point he can win that, he will ask for a referendum. But my guess on that is that we'll wait at least 4 years. We'll see. I'm coming back to the just post-war area. Things do not happen by luck, by chance. They happen because there are ideas. And ideas are in the minds of certain people who have some influence. Behind the idea of a government of Europe, which is called today European Union, which is a kind of European government. Who was there? I have to quote one person first, and the name of that person is Jean Monnet. Jean Monnet is called one of the father of Europe. I happen to think that it is partly true. Just to say a few words about Jean Monnet. Jean Monnet was a banker, he was a businessman, but he was also a political thinker. He was interested in politics. And during the war, he was an advisor of an American president by the name of Roosevelt during the Second World War. And then, after the war, Jean Monnet, who had close ties with the Democratic administration in the United States, Roosevelt and then Truman, they were completely in agreement. Now, there should be a kind of European Union. So the idea of an European Union probably was there before the end of the war. And Jean Monnet was certainly the first to think about that. He was the first to think about that, and I would like to try to explain his ideas. The idea of Jean Monnet was to create a political entity and to have in economics as much free trade as possible. So that seems to be possible, and it seems to be apparently a good political idea, but that has to be put inside a political framework with the forces that were there. Obviously, it was not possible to do that with the communists, but it had to be done against them and to defend Western civilization against the Eastern dangers. So different things were at stake. The prosperity of Europe, the defense of Europe, which is another topic but which is linked to this one too, and also the defense in a large sense, the defense of its economy and the defense of its ideals, values and civilization, and also of its military freedom. Since countries after countries fell because of military takeover, there was much thinking in the West about how to defend militarily Western Europe. That has been a question for many years, and different answers have been given to that. One of the answers was the NATO, but that was not the only answer. Other people began to say, hey, the Soviets are so strong that the NATO cannot defend us, so maybe it's good to have an atomic bomb. This was the thinking of the British and of the French. And so there were different views and visions about defense. The idea was that Europe, politically, economically, and militarily, should be something with a strong ties. So Jean Monnet decided to put his influence through the political framework: Italy, Germany, and France. So who were the other founders of the European Union as we know it today? That's easy. For Germany, that was, as I mentioned before, Konrad Adenauer, who was in charge of Germany after the war, of Alcide de Gasperi in Italy, and in France, somebody by the name of Robert Schuman. You want me to write their names? No? You know them? I will write them. So they were heads of state. They were statesmen. And they had ideas. They belonged, each of them, they were in charge of their government. They belonged in each country, Germany, Italy, France, to what is called the Christian Democratic Party. That's the name in Germany. It was the name in Italy. It has collapsed. It used to be the name in France. It has not completely collapsed. It was 10% a few years ago. And my bet is that in the next election which is coming, they will have still less. That has a meaning. What was the Christian Democrats' idea? For sure, they did not want the communists to be there. However, very often they had to have an alliance with the Social Democrats. And I would give another name, Paul-Henri Spaak. Paul-Henri Spaak was a socialist. He was a socialist from Belgium, and he was a very strong anti-communist personally, and he fought very much for that cause. So there had been a coalition. What about the classical liberals? After the war, they were not very numerous. Before the war, they were not very numerous either, but after the war, they had been destroyed through the war. Politically, in France, they were very tiny. In Italy, the real liberals were a very tiny party. And in Germany, also, the real liberals were not politically very influential at the time. So the real classical liberals said we have to fight first the biggest enemy, and then we'll see later. So what happened was that these three persons, with Jean Monnet, they are called the fathers of Europe. They decided to go ahead. And decided to go ahead and do something with the different objectives that I just told you before. So they decided to go ahead. What did they do? I would say that I don't want to go too much in details. They wanted a European government. They wanted free trade in Europe. And they wanted a government with three branches. The executive branch, a parliament, and a court of justice. So they decided that if they would ask for that immediately, it would not be possible. So they decided to go slowly, and they decided to go first for a treaty on coal and steel in 1952. It is quite important to understand what happened at the time. For the first time, there has, for the first time in Europe probably, there has been a new institutions in 52 with an executive part, which was called the High Authority. This High Authority was above the governments on many problems. Coal and steel, there should be a market in coal and steel, plus there should be a direct planning of coal and steel from not the different governments, but from this new authority. Now, this new authority was the beginning of a European government. It has complete freedom to have its own policy, and very often when one country or another, the six founders of Europe and of this institution, when one or the other country said, "Oh, I don't like that," that country had to abide by the new decisions. So to control that authority, this authority had two goals. First, a kind of free market in gold and steel. But this free market had to be managed. And that was a kind of mixed economy. This is my first point. The founders of Europe, with their philosophy of Christian Democrats aligning themselves with Social Democrats, and with the classical liberals only as a small support, they did want to have a mixed economy. More freedom, of course, for trade, but at the same time, control of trade. That may seem contradictory, but that was their philosophy. So, what happened in 52 was that there was this high authority, a new and supranational organization above the governments. There was a parliament supposed to control that authority, and there was a justice court. So these three parts of the institution. These three kinds inside the new European institution were thought since the beginning as a political entity, and the economy, the idea to have free trade inside the six countries of Europe that I mentioned before, was an idea that it was not enough to have free trade. It was necessary to have a political entity to control the free trade. Now, it's difficult. I cannot go into the details to discuss all this this way of thinking at the time. At the time, it was seen first as a new step toward the elimination of some tariffs in Europe. And it was also seen as a first step toward a common market. It was also seen as a first step toward a really complete government for all Europe, including military defense. So the next step, of course, was to create new institutions, enlarging the first. That was done immediately after, in 1952, new institutions were proposed. One of the first functions of our government is to defend the property and the lives of the people. So the first thing to think, with the Soviet danger of the time, was to have a European army. This European army was a treaty, was signed by different governments, but it has to be ratified. And at the same time, another document, a kind of constitution for Europe, for a government completely supranational, with all the attributions of a government, had to be created through another treaty. So, if the two treaties had passed at the time, there would have been a European army, there would have been a European government with its executive branch, its parliament, and its justice court. We are not that far from that today, but it's important maybe to see what happened in different parts of the time. So what happened with that project of a federal union, a supranational Europe at the time? First of all, I just said that I will qualify the economics of the European Union as a mixed economy. It was like that after the war. It's still like that today. The only problem that we can have is to say how far from a complete socialism is the European economy today, or even before. I'm not sure that we can have different opinions about that. I would say that it is not, neither before, not today, it's not complete socialism in a sense that there is a tremendous amount of private enterprises in Europe. Price controls have been completely abolished, including, I think of France, including the rent controls have been abolished almost completely. So there are trends toward more economic freedom that is certainly putting the European economy not in the category of pure socialism, but in the category of a mixed economy. I would say interventionism, deep interventionism, and I would give you only a few ways of looking at this interventionism. So the idea of a government of Europe, supranational government in Europe, with an army, did collapse in 1954. 1954 was the complete collapse of the idea of a government of Europe, of an army for Europe, and so forth. So, the people like Jean Monnet and even the others began to think, we have lost the battle, but we do not have to give in with our goals. We still have our goals. Maybe we should use other means. So they began to think very quickly that something should be done anyway. I would say that on the political part, for the military part, the NATO was there, the Atlantic Alliance was there, and that the Europeans tended to think, since we cannot defend ourselves directly, we are going to defend ourselves with the United States and through the NATO. So they did not create a defense of their own, and the Europeans began to think that this is a separate job. We have to fight ideologically, and we have to create a common market. We have to create free trade, at least between the 6 members of the first community, which did appear in 52, as I said before. So they decided to sign a treaty. Actually, there were several treaties. It is known as the Treaty or the Treatise of Rome. It was signed and adopted by the 6 in 1957. Remember, the 6 are Germany, France, Italy, plus Luxembourg, Belgium, and Holland. And the 6 decided to go ahead with that Treaty of Rome, and the Treaty of Rome decided that there will be a decrease in taxation of products. There would be a decrease in the tariffs between the 6. Of course, it was not a decrease that would be effective immediately. That would be a decrease in tariff year by year. The idea was to have 10% a year. So that was a long way. However, something happened. The treaty began to be in place in 1958, and very quickly it did appear that it was working much better than it was thought before. In other words, the European economies, which were separated, which were destroyed by the war, began to recover. Of course, I would just give 2 examples. In Germany, not only Konrad Adenauer, but also, I said, Röpke and Erhard were very influential, and they decided to go and really open the economy. And in a few years, Germany, which was destroyed in the war, revived economically, and it was called a German miracle. German miracle because nobody expected Germany to recover so fast. In Italy, the situation was a little bit different. There was somebody by the name of Einaudi. Einaudi was a professor of economics. He was very influential in politics, and he was, if I remember well, he was a member of the Mauperin Society, and he was a great friend of Mises and Hayek. So they decided to open also more the Italian economy. Remember, I spoke about the French situation before. The socialists have been in power for a long time, including until 52. So they had their policy, and there was no French miracle. And any time the socialists come, they promise that the economy will boom, and not only it never happens, but it is the exact reverse, which happens. Now we say, look, you have socialist government for a few years in France, and there is no disaster. Yet maybe, but these socialists of today in France, they have privatized and privatized and privatized. They run on a program of nationalization, and when they got to power, they privatized. So that's the situation of the French left. Now let's look at the French right. The French right, Mr. Chirac, he ran on a program, vote for me, I will cut taxes immediately. He won the election because of that. And the first thing he did was to increase taxes tremendously. There was an election 2 years later. He lost in a landslide. So let's see what happened next year. We don't know. Okay, so the political situation has been diverse. There was a German miracle, an Italian miracle. There was no French miracle at all. However, something happened in 52. Is that suddenly somebody arrived and said, This is not, we cannot stay like that for a long time. It's completely stupid. Having inflation above inflation, plus price control and so on, that has to be stopped. And this guy, completely unknown, by the name of Antoine Pinault, he was just a politician. He was not an economist at all. He just had a few common sense ideas. So he decided first to stop monetary inflation. What happened? Price inflation stopped immediately. Second, he decided to stop spending, to stop the spending of the government, and sometimes to cut back some spending. And then, in 1 year, everything was better. Inflation was stopped, the economy began to be restored and revived and so forth. And so, when the socialists came back 2 years after, they decided that after all, nationalization and price control and all these things was not the best road to go. So they decided to be more centrist, I would say. So now we are with this common market, 57, 58. The economy is recovering at different speed in different countries, but it's recovering so fast that suddenly people, the six begin to think, hey, maybe we should accelerate the process of cutting the tariffs. So they did accelerate the cutting of the tariffs, and instead of cutting by 10%, they began to cut by 15%. So they accelerated the process, and pretty soon the economy began to boom. The European economy recovered to a tremendous extent. I remember when I was a kid and there was nothing, not even an apartment in Paris because of rent control. And what is today, the recovery is absolutely fantastic. Now, when I speak to some of my students, they cannot imagine that it was like that 50 years ago. But we come from a very, very long way. Now, with this new recovery, I want to insist on something. Some people say, hey, it's because of Europe that this progress has been possible. Wait a minute. Depends what we mean by Europe. If by Europe we mean a political government, it certainly did not help at all to have all these bureaucrats everywhere on top of the other one to help the economy. What created the economic boom was free trade, free enterprise, and private property in Western Europe. When we had nationalization, like in France, massive nationalization, it did not work. I would say that even in the public education, things have deteriorated and are worse today than they were 50 years ago. There is no doubt about that. So if there is some progress in some area, there are regressions. So we have to balance the judgment. Now, what was the evolution of the six European countries? There were not many, only six, small. The pressure of the East, the dependence on NATO was something that was not very enthusiastic for the European people, and they decided to extend. They decided to extend in 1973. They decided to extend to Great Britain, Ireland, and Denmark. So now there were 10. There were 9. And in 1981, they decided to accept Greece. That was the 10. And in 86, Spain and Portugal joined. And in 1995, Finland, Sweden, and Austria decided to join. To join what? To join the common markets only. To that point, there was no problem. They decided also to be included in the European Union, which is a political entity. And one of the problems that exists today, I have no perfect solution for that, is that there is about 12 countries from the East who want to join. But, there is a big but. They are not going to join simply a common market. They have to join a political power at the same time. And some countries decided not to come. Who are those countries? Which are those countries? First, Switzerland repeatedly refused to be included. Are they better off or worse off? Clearly, they are better off. So the idea that if you want to be better off, you have to be inside, clearly, It's not true. Switzerland is there. There is another country which decided not to join. It's completely forgotten today. It is Norway. Now we said, we don't want to join because we are better off outside than inside. If we are inside, we have all these regulations that we don't have. We'll be worse off. The same as the Swiss. There was a vote recently in Switzerland rejecting any idea of coming inside the European Union. The no won by 70 or more % of the vote. And immediately in other countries of Europe, people began to say, hey, they did not really vote on Europe. They did not know that they were voting against Europe. There will be another one, and the other one they will understand first that they have to enter, and that is good for them. I can tell you, we have polls. And the polls show that in Switzerland, if there would be another referendum, it will be lost by 80%. So it means that the idea that everybody has to be inside the European entity is not accepted by everybody. And even other countries do not accept the idea of the intrusion of the bureaucrats of Brussels inside their countries. I would like to give a few examples. When a country votes in the right direction, which means in the direction of the bureaucrats of Brussels, that's okay. It's a good country. But if a country begins to say no, I think of Denmark. Denmark had a referendum a few years ago on the monetary problems of Europe, having or not a single unit, a single monetary unit. They voted no. The European bureaucrats were furious. You cannot say no. You don't have the right to say no. You have the right to vote, but not to say no. So what was decided? You will have the right to say yes another time. So they had another referendum. Okay. Now a new problem arose with Austria. The socialists were in the power for years. An alliance from the right and the socialists, and especially with the socialists, that was okay for years and years. And suddenly, the Austrians decided to get rid of the socialists. You don't have the right to do that. So you are going to be boycotted. What does that mean, to be boycotted? It means that you're a member of the union, but you don't have the right to vote inside the union. If you have an ambassador, he's not going to be received anywhere. That was the boycott of Austria. Okay. Now arrived another problem. Ireland was really a country which was in favor of Europe. The construction, they call that the construction of Europe. They had recently voted. They did vote no. Same thing, the European bureaucrats, they began to scream and to say that they are permitted to vote, but not to say no. They have to say yes. Okay, so they have to have another referendum. But now they are and say, we have voted already once, we don't need to vote a second time. And then the bureaucrats in Europe began to say, oh, they did not vote, they don't want to vote again, but it does not matter, we will continue what we want to do. So I have to say that I become to be a little worried about this process. And I think it is time that some people really do something and say it is going too far. And in the name of democracy, any time people is going to vote in a good way, then it will be accepted. And if they do not vote in the good way, which is the socialist way, then they will be punished. Then there was another bad news. The Italian had a government, a centrist government. It was presented all over Europe as a centrist government. And maybe centre-left, maximum. However, it was headed by an ex-communist. So I have nothing against an ex-communist, but it depends how much ex. Some people have been communist. I think in the United States, some people in the conservative movement, I know different person in the conservative movement, they have been communists or Trotskyite or whatever, but they completely changed. They became American conservatives. Now, I don't think that the Italian communists became Italian conservatives. So what happened? The Italians, they know better. There are some Italians here. They know better, and they threw away this government too. It was not the first time. It happened already 5 or 6 years ago. Mr. Berlusconi won the election with a party of the right, another party of the right, and immediately the French government, the French socialists, began to scream, "You conservative, you allied yourself with an extreme right party." And then Mr. Antonio Martino, who was the minister of the economy, maybe Martino was minister of what? Yes, he was Minister of Foreign Affairs. He came to Paris and he said, "Look, you have not the right to give us moral lessons because you, government, socialist government, who is your ally inside the French government? The Communist Party, which is one of the worst Stalinists in all the world." So that was it was the end, unfortunately, very quickly, because I understand Mr. Bossi left. He left. So the coalition collapsed, and that was the end. And the French socialists were delighted, I have to say. Now, they were not delighted for too long, because Mr. Berlusconi won a tremendous victory recently. The socialists of any kind, social democrats, right-wing socialists, or whatever, the communists, ex-communists, new communists, whatever, everybody was voted, were ousted. I understand that some true communists in Italy never wanted to be in that coalition, but they were ousted anyway. So there is a new government, and the French socialists began to say, "Hey, look at these guys. They are bad. They are like the Austrians, the Danish, the Ireland, and so forth." But there is another government over there, which not many people speak about that government. It is done in Spain. In Spain, there has been a conservative government which decided to free the economy to a certain amount. And we were speaking yesterday about the amount of unemployment in Spain. What happened was that the rate of unemployment in Spain before this new government was something like 24 or something like that. With the new government, quietly they began to free the labor market, to free the economy, slowly, certainly, but surely. And the coalition, which was at the beginning which was weak at the beginning, since there was real progress pretty fast, then the political coalition began to gain speed and some steam. And what happened? There was a re-election, and Mr. Aznar was re-elected. So they are bad news for the European socialists, which are basically the French and the German socialists. But what's going to happen? Nobody knows. I have to explain not only the political side, but also the economic side, what happened with money, and what the different political forces are doing with the money. That is quite important. Now, clearly, the common market was a great success. It was a great success. However, in 1956, people began to think, hey, we should have a new treaty, and in this new treaty, which was called a Single Act, we should abolish the remnants of the tariffs that we still have. So that was a small treaty that had its use, but it was more economical. It was more for free trade, for totally freeing the economy, the trade, not the economy, the trade in Europe. And there was not much of political new institution in that trade. Of course, they wanted to have a little bit more of government. That did not go very, very far. So I have to speak as quickly as possible about the monetary problems in Europe, because they are of tremendous importance, and in my view, they should not be linked to other problems. They should be completely separated. Of course, the bureaucrats in Brussels, they would like to link the monetary questions with every other question. In other words, they would like to intervene anywhere in the economy, saying that, oh, if we don't do that, or if this country does not do that, then there will be a problem with the money. So this is why I say it should be separated. Monetary problems and the other problems should be separated. If we do not separate them, then the bureaucrats are going to say, in the name of a stable money, say, who is opposed to that? In the name of a stable money, they would like to intervene everywhere in Europe. So I think very strongly that that should be the money should be separated from other political policies. If I have time, I would give you one of the versions of a proposal that I have made over the years, and I still make today for Europe to get out of the monetary problems in Europe. Let's go back to what happened. The snake. We have heard of the snake. What happened? Why did the Europeans want a snake? What is a snake first? Remember, in President Nixon, 1971, he decided to get off the gold standard. Immediately, all the currencies began to float against each other. So there was a big deal, a big problem. It is that for the United States, if the dollar is fluctuating against any other countries, it doesn't matter very much. For the market inside the United States, there is still a common market in the United States. But if each money in Europe begins to fluctuate against the other currencies of Europe, then there is no common market anymore. So the first thing that was done was that the Europeans decided to have a kind of monetary cooperation, and the goal was to keep the monetary currencies inside close margins. They were not that close. They were 2.25%. That's not too. This is already a big margin, but it was a step. I would not say in the right direction. It was a step in the idea that if there is not some stabilization in the monetary currencies in Europe, then the common market will disappear. Period. Percent on the good, and if you have a variation of 15 or 20% on one currency, clearly the variation in the currency is much bigger. It's a higher tax than the tariffs. So the variations were reversing completely the common market and free trade in Europe. So this snake was an essay to stop the fluctuations. But what it is, basically it's price control. And when you have price control money, when you have artificial rates imposed on the economy, then what happened? It just collapsed. The Nixon agreement, the Smithsonian agreement by Nixon in 1971, the duration of this agreement was, I think, 13 months, and it was an international agreement, and it did collapse very quickly. Now, the snake was an agreement between Europeans, and it was vital for the Europeans to get it. And then it collapsed also very quickly. Now, we are at the end of 77, 78. All the European currencies are fluctuating again. Europe, the common market, again, seems that it could disappear, and that we could have an economic collapse in Europe, really. And then they decided something else. They would create the European monetary system, which was a snake with the money in the middle. It was called something like a common unit in the middle. But basically it was the same. It was price control. And in 1979, Professor Salin, who is speaking here regularly, just after that was signed, he wrote a small book in which he said he predicted that this system will not work because it's price control, and price control never works. It did not work, but what happened was that instead of having daily fluctuation on a small scale, we had several times in the year devaluation, revaluation, up to 18%. Now, when you want to stabilize a system, when you impose a rule for everybody, and you have 18% variation, it is even worse than to have fluctuating currencies. And then, I think it was 92, the whole system collapsed completely, and it was such a disaster that the European governments decided to increase the margins of fluctuation. They decided to keep the name, the European Monetary System. But they decided that the fluctuation could be plus or minus 15%. So, if you take minus 15%, plus 15%, that makes 30% of variation legally possible. We still have the system, the monetary system. But if a currency goes from the down part of the margin, and the other one is in the upper part, you have 30% of difference. If one goes down, the other one goes up, the variation of the two currencies have 60% of variation. Of course, they said that the system was still there, but that was a kind of paradox because actually it was a real collapse of the system. They decided then that there should be something else. There should be a single currency for all the European countries. The name now is known, it's called the euro. And this single currency for Europe was decided through a treaty, the Treaty of the Economic Union. And this treaty has a name, it's called the Maastricht Treaty because it was signed in Maastricht. However, the French voted the treaty by a referendum only by 51%. It was very, very close. The Poles gave 75% for the treaty before the referendum in France. And the key thing is that the politicians, they believe the Poles. So they decided for a referendum, and they got only 51%. Now, other countries, like Germany, was confronted with the same problem. And the Germans were a little wiser. They decided that if they really wanted the treaty, they had better have no referendum. And they had no referendum. They voted the whole thing. But they said, if there is a problem with the euro, if it becomes inflationary, then we keep the right, we Germans, to get out. And so they voted the treaty with the implication that the German laws are above the European laws. That was a way. Now, England and two other countries, Denmark maybe, they decided to, before the treaty there was a big problem. Linked with the treaty, before the treaty was signed, there was a problem with England, I think it was Denmark and Ireland. They decided that they did not want to be included in a European Union which would be political. So, the Maastricht Treaty that we have is not the same as the one which was presented at the time. The one which was presented was not only on money, it was on the idea to have a complete government, the executive branch, the parliament branch, and the justice court as the top level with jurisdiction of everything on every other country. So the British said, if you want that, you will do that, but without us. Then the people literally begin to say, if we do that and there is not England inside, there is two other countries that are not there, we have to go step by step. In the end, we will succeed with our government, but we have to go step by step. So we propose the Treaty of Maastricht with only money inside, to speak briefly. So they succeeded very in a margin, and there is now this European euro, which is a single currency for Europe. Another treaty appeared, 1997, Amsterdam. The idea is that if you have a treaty like that, maybe it's not enough, because some countries, they may have deficits, other countries may have higher interest rate, whatever. We have to regulate a little more. This is the spirit of the Treaty of Amsterdam. And finally, one of the problems that we have today, I'm looking at the time to see how many minutes I have to speak about the different problems of the euro. The euro is a monetary unit. It is not yet, you cannot have euro in banknotes or coins, but it's going to be, I think it's going to be done very quickly after the 1st of January. I met with different bankers and they told me that it's not possible to do that in one day, but that in 15 days they will change all the notes in the cashier, in the banks everywhere, so that since people go and cash money at the banks 2 or 3 times a week, and then when the banks have changed their notes, that will be the end of the European currencies that we have today. And the euro, which is now the real money, the real checkbook money, will become also a money for the average citizens. So I think that's what's going to happen. And what's going to happen next is going to be who is going to run the money. We had that problem for at least 2 years. And the problem is that we have a central bank in Europe with a president who is highly politicized, and it was decided by different countries, and naturally France was against him. They wanted to have a French governor for the new central bank. So there is a big political battle going on for who is running the Central Bank of Europe. So some of the solutions are, it should be more democratic. We should vote. Who should vote? The European Parliament. Then you have this always progressive machinery coming on. If it's the European Parliament, then we have to give more power to the European Parliament. Then the European Parliament is taking this problem to have more power on money. But at the same time that they have more power on money, they have more power on other things. Now I have a solution for that. There is so much gold in the central banks in Europe. And the new European Central Bank has the possibility to have all this gold. To give you an idea, there is between 70 and 80% of gold against the cash, against the banknotes. So it means that if you would like to go to a gold standard tomorrow, it would be possible to do that immediately. My solution is this one. When in January the central bank is going to issue and exchange all the currencies of Europe against these banknotes in euro, they could very well, because they have the gold in there, they could very well print gold coins for the same amount and replace the old European currencies with gold. Now, I still have another news. If we have the euro in banknotes, all the gold is going to stay there. What to do? What for? It will still be possible when the United States wants a gold standard. For the Europeans, it will be extremely easy to do. There will be so much gold. There is so much gold that it will be possible to go back to another kind of gold standard in Europe. What is the key advantage of a gold standard? With a gold standard in Europe, there will not be any more fluctuating currencies, and so that would be the most solid basis for the common market in Europe. At the same time, it will be completely independent from any government. It will be also independent from the European Commission, which is the the nucleus of the government in Europe, and on top of that, it would become impossible to say, we want that or that regulation on the budget of a country, for instance, because we have to stabilize the money. It will be the reverse. It will be because there will be a stable money that the different governments will have to curtail their budget and cut their spending and cut their deficits. So, when some people tell me, you have to stabilize first, you have first to cut spending and cut the taxes and cut the deficits that we have, I reverse the argument and I say that in the 19th century we had a gold standard, and because of the gold standard there was not these huge deficits that we have today. So when people say you have to cut first the deficit, I say no. If you have a gold standard, then anybody will have to do that, and that will be a more simple solution, and on top of that, that will not be done by the bureaucrats of Brussels. Now, I have maybe another minute. I would like to say what should be done in Europe today. So many things. In money, I've given my views very quickly. I have different articles on that. Now, what to do? Certainly not increase the budget of Europe. We should decrease the different subsidies in Europe. We should stop the protectionist measures, the true and the false. Sometimes there are false reasons to have protectionist measures for outside. So that should be also destroyed, and Europe should be really open, and there should not be a protectionist views of Europe. Now, when negotiating with the new countries, I think that it is not wise to impose on the new countries who want to benefit of the common market to impose political regulation, special tax laws, laws with the union and so forth. That should be free, and that should not be imposed on the new countries. Now, I would like to say something for the countries that are already there. The European, especially the French and the Germans and some others, they should stop the big countries, by the way. They should stop harassing the small countries. And when it comes to Italy, they cannot do that because Italy is not a small country. So I have many other things. Maybe we have a